So this morning I want to share a devotional series this week from Luke 24:13 through 35. And this is the road to Emmaus, the Emmaus passage, which was part of the scripture reading for this past Sunday. It was the gospel reading for this past Sunday. But I chose to preach the Acts passage because I wanted to preach the Acts passage last week, and I also want to preach the Acts passage this coming week. But this Emmaus Road passage is just so powerful, and I know that you've heard it before. I'm going to read a few verses of it this morning. When I was looking at commentators on this passage, they say this passage rivals, as far as powerful passages in the scriptures and the gospels, it rivals the parable of the prodigal son. It's so powerful. And then another commentator said that the beauty of its writing is so beautiful and so well designed and told so well that it's almost on equal to Luke's birth narrative when he tells about Jesus' birth. So this passage is just a powerful passage. It was one that I really didn't feel led to preach this past week. I really felt led to preach the Acts passages, but it is one I just wanted to share this week from the Road to Emmaus passage. And in doing that, let me read verses 13 through 17, verses 13 through 17 of Luke 24. It says, "That very day, 2 of Jesus' followers were going to a village named Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. And they were talking with each other about all these things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing together, Jesus himself drew near and went with them. But their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, 'What is this conversation that you are holding with each other as you walk?' And they stood still, looking sad." And I want to end with that verse this morning. And, I was just reflecting and have been on this passage. And as I have, you see them on the road to Emmaus trying to understand what's happened. There's a sense of confusion there over what has occurred with Jesus, with, they saw his ministry, all the things that he said and that he did, and then lo and behold, he's arrested and killed by the Jewish authorities. And then they've apparently, as we'll see in the passage later, they've heard some of the resurrection stories. They've heard of the empty tomb, and so they're confused. They're wondering what's going on. And so when we experience grief, and I do think at this point they're still experiencing grief. There's confusion, there's a lack of understanding, but really, to the best of their understanding, they're experiencing grief and loss. And so they're cognitively kind of dulled at this point in verses 13 through 16. They're discussing it, they're trying to understand it. And one of the things you find when we are mourning or when we're grieving, many times we process things cognitively much more slowly. It takes much more time and much more effort when we're feeling that sense of that sense of sadness. And so we have them experiencing this kind of dulled cognitive ability. We know in verse 17 it says there that they're sad. They're just sad. With Jesus, they say they know he was a prophet. They expect him to be the Messiah. And lo and behold, they see him crucified. He dies upon the cross. And so they're sad. And when we experience loss, we are sad. And that sadness, you don't want sadness to become depression. Okay, for some people it does go into that. But there is a deep sense of sadness here and loss. Not only that, there's a loss of hope in verse 21. In verse 21 it says, "But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. We had hoped. They had placed their hope in Jesus. And now at this point, they're disappointed. They thought he was the one to redeem Israel. And by redeem here, they mean that they thought he was the political leader that was going to come, kick the Romans out, set up the Jewish state, and rule. So they didn't understand what redemption meant at this point, but they had some concept that the Messiah would redeem Israel. And so we have these things going on, this kind of cognitive slowness. We have them emotionally being sad. We have this loss of hope. And let's think about this. When we experience loss, maybe it's the loss of a loved one. When we experience that loss, there's the loss of that person that that's passed away. There's that loss, and so we're missing them. But there's more than that to loss. There's also many times a loss of hope because, and surely this depends. I mean, who was the person? How long did we know the person? How were they related to us? I mean, as family or friend, especially though if it's a child. There's often a loss of hope because there's all these expectations, or even if it's the loss of a spouse, there's these expectations for the future. And so when we experience loss, what happens is not only a loss of a person, but there's a loss of the things we expected to happen as we go forward together in life. And so here, these disciples of Jesus are experiencing loss. They're grieving, they're mourning. They're trying to understand. Some translations here, instead of saying that they were talking and discussing, says they were debating. They were debating what had happened. And so they're really struggling to get a handle on this thing as they're leaving Jerusalem and walking the 7 miles to Emmaus. But don't miss this. I wanted to build up that section of what I was saying before I mention this. One of the things we see happen in this, though, is Jesus joins them. Jesus joins them. They're talking with each other, and then in verse 15, they're talking, discussing together. Jesus himself drew near and went with them. And I know this is kind of spiritualizing the text, maybe in some eyes. But when we experience those times of confusion, those times of loss, of mourning, of grieving, we don't always realize that Jesus is there with us. Jesus is joined to us through our baptism, through our faith in him. Even when we're in that time of confusion and maybe even disillusionment and going, Lord, where are you in all of this? Jesus has joined with us. And so today, I hope with whatever you're experiencing in your own life, I mean, this is a strange time, isn't it? I mean, it's a time where, we're more secluded, we're more, I know I was mentioning earlier that Cindy and I, we really only go out to maybe go for a walk together, or we go to the grocery store. But by and large, we're not out and about and doing normal life. And yet, during this time when it's strange, it's different, it's abnormal for us, know that Jesus is with you. Jesus has joined with you. And so I hope that will give you encouragement, comfort as you go through your day today. And we'll continue reflecting on the Emmaus passage this week. And thank you for joining me this morning. I really appreciate it. And I hope that you do receive some encouragement from it as well.